Hello and a very warm welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Big Picture with me, Frank Razan Pereira. Since you're here, I would like to thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get incisive content. The Bharata First team runs a daily Big Picture quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in the Big Picture videos. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. The small contribution that you make will go a long way in us bringing you this content. Do continue to show your love and support. All the information is in the description of the video, so please go through it. Now, on to the discussion. The West Bengal government has decided to set up a legislative council or a Vidhan Parishad, the upper house of state legislature. The decision was taken on May 17th during the virtual cabinet meeting chaired by Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee. Once the council is set up, it would pave way for accommodating those who could not be elected to the Legislative Assembly or the leaders who were excluded from the party candidates list for the Assembly elections. As per the norm, to create or to abolish a state legislative council, the State Legislative Assembly must pass a resolution which must be supported by majority of the strength of the House. The Trinamool Congress won the recently concluded assembly elections by bagging 213 seats of the state's 292 seats that went to polls. Bharatiya Janata Party won 77. West Bengal had a two-house or a bicameral system of legislature till it was abolished by the United Front government in 1969. Setting up a legislative council was one of the promises in the TMC's poll manifesto. Chief Minister Banerjee and Bengal's Finance Minister Amit Mitra are currently not members of the Legislative Assembly and thus can be nominated to the council once it is established. In that case, the leaders will not be required to get elected to the Assembly. A Chief Minister or a Minister has to be a member of either of the two houses. Now, in this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze the decision of Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee's cabinet approving the setting up of Legislative Council in West Bengal. Joining me on the program today are Piyush Singh, advocate of the Supreme Court, and Yogendra Narayan, former Secretary General of the Rajya Sabha. Thank you to both my panelists for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. Mr. Narayan, let me start the program with you first. Your thoughts, firstly, on the setting up of a Legislative Council in West Bengal. How do you look at this entire issue?
See, the constitutional provision is very clear. And that is why we already have 6 legislative councils already functioning. They say that if the state assembly decides by a majority vote and at least by 3/4 members present, 2/3 members present, that they need a legislative council, they pass a resolution and they'll send it to the center. It's now on the center to accept the resolution and then pass a law accordingly. You see, legislative councils have had a very interesting history. Earlier, there were only 4, then became 5, and then now 6, and this will be the 7th one. It is usually adopted in the states when they find that a lot of people who are politically active but have lost the elections or have not got a nomination for the legislative assembly, then they are fitted into the legislative councils, and it is good. No harm in getting more politicians, more political voices in the framing of laws. And as they say of the Rajya Sabha, you know that the lower house always passes bills on the spur of the moment, and it's like having a cup of tea that if it's very hot, you put it on a plate, it cools down, and then it gets considered. So it is expected that the Legislative Council will also adopt a similar way as we do in the Rajya Sabha, that they deliberate and look calmly, because they are not representing the people directly. It's an indirect representation. They represent, for instance, the local governments. They represent the educated people, the graduates, then they represent the teachers, and also nominees of the governor. So it's good. In a democracy, the more people participate in a democracy, and in legislation and lawmaking, the better it is. And I don't see any harm. I would positively recommend that this resolution which has been passed should be accepted by the center.
Absolutely. All right. So, Piyush, let me bring you to the picture now. How do you look at it from a legal perspective? What is the norm to be followed? What's the process really?
Frank, as Mr. Narayan has pointed out rightly, I would say it's a prerogative of the state government, respective state government under Article 169. So there would be hardly any two opinions about it. So once the state government decides, so it's ideally by the legislative assembly, the state's legislative assembly by majority and two-thirds present in voting. Once that mandate is presented and being sent to the parliament, and parliament approves it under Article 169, a legislative council for a state can be formed. But the larger question is, in case now, I would slightly differ from Mr. Narayan's that is it inherently good or there is no harm in having a legislative council? So usually there is an argument in case there's no harm in having a legislative council, then every state would have it. Why only 7 states? There are over 25 states in the country. Every state should have it. The only restrictions, of course, for every state to have it is under Article 171, because Article 171, Frank, provides that for a state to have a legislative council, the total number of members should not be more than 1/3 of the members present in the legislative assembly. Number one, and number two, it should not be less than 40. So effectively, for example, if you take the case of the state of Haryana, which has legislative assembly strength is 90, 1/3 would be 3030. So it can't be more than 30, and it has to be over 40 as per Article 171. So not more than 1/3 and more than 40. So effectively, Haryana cannot even have it, even if they pass under 169. But there are other states which have relatively more than 120 members in the legislative assembly, which can effectively have a legislative council, which do not have it. And in fact, West Bengal was one of the states which had legislative councils, and that legislative council was abolished way back in 1969 or 1970, I would say. And now again, a proposal has been put forward that there will be a legislative council. So the question now, since you put a legal question to me, I will answer the legal aspects to it. But I would want to give an overall framework that when we say it's good or bad, we will have to analyze that from a perspective whether this state government had in its manifesto promised for a legislative council. The answer would be yes. Now, why it was, Mr. Yogendra Narayan has rightly pointed out. Now, it is to accommodate politicians who could not be given a political ticket or who have lost elections. Like maybe in this case, in some cases, the Chief Minister himself doesn't contest an assembly election and he gets nominated, or I would say elected to Legislative Council. But I would say that was never the vision of the Constitution. It would never be a vision of the Constitution to have a upper house wherein you are accommodating politicians who have lost elections or accommodating politicians who didn't get a ticket. It was never the vision. So if you look into the parliamentary debates, the actual intent of having an upper house in states was that there should be some intellectual discussions, or there should be a representation of people who would not get directly nominated, who would not contest elections, but who would be nominated by the governor, or who would come from being represented by the teachers, who, since also 1/12 of the member are elected by the teachers, directly or indirectly, then students vote for it. Then 1/3 of the members are elected by the MLAs, or the I would say members of the Legislative Assembly, 1/3 from the municipal corporations, civic bodies. So the intent was to have that harmony which is there, to have the right breed of people coming in from every strata, so that a complete representation would come in when it comes to deliberation of different kind of bills. So that was the actual intent, which has been lost in the political ideologies, I would say, good, bad, or otherwise. So in case you legally, the question is put forward, Frank, definitely the state has a prerogative under 169 of the article. But again, the important thing would be Article 169 provides that once a state legislature passes that resolution, it will be the discretion, because the word is not discretion, it says the parliament may. It's not the parliament shall. So though there are, we have hardly seen a cases where a parliament refuses to do it. And I think in this case, there may be some difficulty, but ideally there should not be. Once the thumping majority of the assembly is there, ideally the parliament should not do it in such cases. But the framework of 169 is in such a way that it provides that discretion, that little discretion to the parliament.
Absolutely. I think that's a very valid point that Piyush has raised. I'd like to take that forward with you, Mr. Narayan. We've seen over the years as well, discourse in our legislature come down, and that has happened both at the state level as well as at the central level. And also, the reason for which we set up these legislative councils, somehow it seems to have been diluted, and we are not seeing the right kind of people there. Instead, we see, people who are close to the political class, the ruling class, get in through the legislative council route as well. So this has somehow taken away the reason why we set up the legislative councils or the upper houses.
You see, when you talk about the type of people, even if you see the state legislatures, not the council, but the state legislature, even there you find all sorts of people who should not be there. They're criminal cases. Now the CBI has caught 4 people from Bengal. Some of them are ministers who were involved in that scam, Sarada scam. So all sorts of people in a democracy come in. And as they say, it is the people who elect them who are basically responsible for getting in such people. But if these people who have criminal background, the election commission, when it directed the election commission to ensure that all those who file their nominations give their criminal background, their financial background, it was expected that the ordinary voter would see those nomination papers and see their assets and their criminal cases and then decide. So you see, they say that the people get the government they deserve, but that's how it has been happening for many years now. It's not a new phenomena. So all that is being done now is the state legislatures are there, Vidhan Sabhas are there, but in 6 states are existing, and naturally they will house similar people. It is not going to be a new phenomena in Indian democracy that suddenly you get very bright and intellectual people coming into the Vidhan Parishad. I find but those who are keen on elections, they get their names in and they then canvass and get in. So as Piyush said, Mr. Piyush said, the constitution framers had a different idea in mind. But the way democracy has evolved in India, you will get the same type of people in the Vidhan Parishad also as we have in the Vidhan Sabhas. So I don't think we should get too worried. And we have the free press, we have these TV channels, we have now the social media. So that should be the more effective check on these people and the elected than anything else. The constitution framers never realized that it's not only the people who are going to check; it's going to be the social media, the free press, and the various means of communication amongst the media that is also going to affect the choice of the voter.
Right.
And I think, you see, by and large, democracy has not failed in India. In spite of all these shortcomings, criminals getting elected, a small portion, of course, 10%, 15%, or people with who have created doubtful assets of their own. Even then, democracy is working very well, I thought, as compared to other countries. So there is nothing wrong. Thank you.
All right, points taken. So, Piyush, let me come back to you now. Let's talk about this aspect and widen the scope of the discussion and see how the legislative councils have really helped democracy as a whole. Do you believe that that is really the case, or do you believe much more needs to be done?
Frank, when we look into the power and privileges of the members of the Legislative Council, they are, I would say, more or less similar to the members of the Legislative Assembly. The immunity under Article 194, the power and privileges are almost the same. Then anything spoken like in the Parliament, members have immunity when it comes to the discussion. Same immunities with respect to members of Legislative Assembly and also for the member of Legislative Council. So, but with respect to the importance of it, Rajya Sabha, to a large extent, being the upper house in the parliament, has some discretion when it comes to passing a bill. With respect to legislative councils under Article 197 and 198, Frank, there are a lot of restrictions. So for most of the bills which are passed by the Legislative Assembly, those are not mandatorily to be passed by Legislative Council. Though it says that it would be sent, every bill would be sent, other than a money bill, would be sent to the Legislative Council. But in case the Legislative Council rejects it or gives any suggestive or suggestion or any kind of directive on a particular bill, it will go back to the Legislative Assembly again. And once the Legislative Assembly second time passes that bill, even if Legislative Council rejects it, even in that case, it will be a deemed acceptance. So as per section 197, so which is for every bill other than a money bill. And under 198, a money bill will not be even introduced in Legislative Council. So effectively, if you look into these two provisions, money bill can only be like for Parliament, money bill is always introduced in Lok Sabha. Similarly, for states, in as per 198, money bill will be introduced in the Legislative Assembly, and no specific resolution is required, or it can be sent to Legislative Council, but it is not required. And even if they try to reject it, it would be a deemed acceptance. So effectively, if you look into it, they do not have much role to play, other than making a very, I would say, having that discourse, right discourse in the Legislative Council, right deliberations there, and only its purpose would be solved in case we have right members there, rightly elected people there who can actually represent the ethos of democracy and who can actually rightly bring forward the agendas. Because we all are aware how a bill is passed in this country, or how a law is made, or how a law is amended. You every day we would see alcohol, for example, a state would come with a cabinet would come up with a decision that alcohol is banned in a particular state, and then they would come after 6 months or 2 years that alcohol is allowed or may not be allowed. So there's no rational basis to it at times. There's no rational discussions to it. Just because a political party had it in its election manifesto or in the agenda, it is passed. So Legislative Council in such cases, Frank, has a very important role to play. And that is why I see Article 171, which I just pointed out, which laid down a condition that it should not be more than one third of the MLAs and should not be less than 40. So the only, I would say, the idea behind it would be that the larger states should have it. So because not less than 40, it would mean that only states having more than 120 members in the assembly can have legislative councils. So why would a larger state be mandated in the Indian Constitution? Why should a larger state have a legislative council? The idea was to have people from every corner of the state, from every segment, who could not have been rightly represented in by way of contesting elections. Because we all are aware, not from today, but maybe from the very beginning, that contesting elections was never an easy job. For contesting election, you need not be in a permanent employment or in a state employment. And for contesting election, you require means. Even if we are not talking about today, even if we are talking about 50 years back, what it was, it may not be a muscle power then, may not be a money power then, but it was definitely, you need to be independent and you need to be amongst people. So amongst people in the sense, you need to resonate with the people and the ideas of the people. Here, maybe the idea of legislative council is somebody who may be a scientist, who was otherwise very socially reclusive, who want to put forward his ways of dealing with COVID situation in a particular state. Now I would say, if you ask me a question, who would be the right representatives in legislative council? It may be doctors right now. We may have doctors in there. We may have professionals from each and every field who can bring their diverse ideas, who can bring statistics to the legislative council, who can bring the right data, who can deliberate on that data. That can be, and that discussions of legislative council can be broadcasted to the people of the state, so that it becomes a harmony between the legislative council and assembly. So that would have been the of the otherwise, I would see, my personal opinion is, legislative councils, for not only for West Bengal, but I would say for any state, if it is not solving a purpose, it's not doing it's a job. It's only putting more burden on the state exchequer. You just imagine, Frank, giving the same privileges to one third, more, another 40, 50, 60 or 80 people, giving them the government privileges, those powers, those perks, and spending that much of money, that much of resources, setting up a different, again, infrastructure for setting up a legislative council. It is nothing but putting a lot more burden on the state exchequer.
Absolutely. All right, time to get closing comments now from both my panelists with the best way forward. Starting first with you, Mr. Narayan.
See, I would endorse the view of what the constitution framers thought would be the idea behind setting up of legislative councils. And it is very necessary to have a system where people from various forms of various avenues of life, like teachers, graduates, they have a chance to come in without facing general elections. Because a lot of people don't want to face general elections, but if they can get nominated to the council, they would prefer it. That is why we have this provision also in the Rajya Sabha, that the Rajya Sabha members are elected by the state legislatures, and they don't have to fight any election themselves. And of course, as far as the graduate constituency is concerned, or the local bodies, they fight the elections, but in defined sectors of the population. So it's not like a general election. So many people, because many people who would like to participate in politics would not like to fight general elections. And I think this legislative council gives them an opportunity to do so. That was the idea behind the framers of the constitution. Now, like in all other cases, what the framers thought has not actualized. It has actualized in very different forms, and we have these deficiencies in our democracy. But all said and done, even the legislative councils, wherever they are, they're functioning very well. And I don't think, Frank, that we should think about the money being spent or the on the privileges or on the setting up of these councils. As far as democracy is concerned, democratic structures, whatever be their cost, are essential. And we cannot go and should not go into the economics. We should go into the political values of having these institutions. Democratic uh, importance of these institutions. Economics or the fasting frame of thinking. That's my general comment. Thank you.
All right. And Piyush, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Yeah, Frank, my two bits would be number one, for every state which has a legislative council, there should be a periodic review within the state itself, since it has set up a legislative council of what work or what importance or what the legislative council has brought to the table in a year or 2 years or whatever the time frame would be, rather than keeping it defunct. Number one. Number two, let us hope that whatever legislative councils which are there in the respective states, 6, 7 states now, West Bengal. Now, let us expect that they get the right people, because, of course, it's not only the mandate of the government. To a large extent, that those 1/3 members would come from the members of the legislative assemblies, but they would also be the voting powers with the teachers, students, and with the local municipal corporation. So let us hope and pray that right people are nominated or elected to the legislative councils, especially for a state like West Bengal, which has a very rich cultural history, political history, and for these states, these legislative council, let us hope and pray right people are elected or nominated so that it can really bring value to the table. But my opinion so far has been for all these states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, you would see for Maharashtra, you would see for Andhra Pradesh for that extent. So far, my whatever limited experience or knowledge I have not seen the legislative council to that extent bringing much on the table or bringing the required change.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of the discussion is that the state government has the right, according to the law, to create or abolish a legislative council. The centre will now have to give its nod, which is usually customary, but may not be in this case because of all that we've seen over the last few months. The idea of a legislative council is good and has worked, but of late the quality of those who are sent to the Vidhan Parishad is not up to the mark. We need to focus on what the original aim of the Legislative Council is and build on that. We need to make sure that democracy flourishes, and that should be the bottom line. Once again, thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs a daily Big Picture quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in the Big Picture videos. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. A small contribution that you make will go a long way in us bringing you this content. So do continue to show your love and support. All the information is in the description of the video, so please go through it. That's it from me. See you again next time.